We do not learn about money in school. Many people think it's tacky to talk about money. I feel just the opposite. I think the more we normalize a money conversation, the closer we are going to be to people being comfortable and informed.
From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about the changing nature of work and how that work is changing all of us. And this episode is all about money. Earlier this week, I got into the shower, and during the few minutes that I was washing my hair, Jude picks up my phone. Folks, you will remember, Jude is just 6.5 years old. He figures out my code, he pulls up Amazon, and he uses voice text to identify a baseball glove that he says he really, really wants. He orders it, completes the transaction, and replaces my phone. I don't figure this out, by the way, until I am on the way to camp with him, maybe a half an hour later, and I get a confirmation email saying, hey, the order went through. I was like, what order? Jude, what have you ordered? He says, Mom, I really needed this baseball glove. And I say to him, Jude, it costs money. Where do you think this money comes from? And he looks at me and he says, I don't know, Mom. You go to work and get more of it, right? So today, we're going to have a money conversation. Now, money is hard to talk about because there's the fact of the currency, right? And then there's all the emotional stuff that we have attached to it. And whether we realize it or not, when we are teaching our children about money, when we are talking to each other about money, we are bringing both of those things to the conversation. Our guest today also has a child, and she has been thinking a lot about how to talk to children about money. Mellody Hobson is one of the foremost investors of our time. She is a self-made billionaire. She is the co-CEO of Ariel Investments, and she has written a children's book for and with her daughter, and for all of us, called The Priceless Facts About Money. It's a great book, and this is a great conversation. I hope it helps you to think about how you talk about money with the people that you love. Here's Mellody Hobson.
My childhood is part and parcel to everything that I am, and I think that's true of most people, right?
Sure.
When I grew up, I was the youngest of 6 kids, and I tell the story that my mom worked extremely hard. She was a single mom. We grew up in Chicago, and yet she had a very hard time often making ends meet, and as a result of that, we had some real ups and downs. I mean, there were some rough moments where we would get evicted. Our phone used to get disconnected all the time. Our lights would be turned off. You know, it just really was at times a topsy-turvy existence as a child. And I say that that period was fundamental to who I am because at that point, that insecurity, that financial insecurity, which caused a great deal of anxiety for me, it made me desperate to understand money. And I use the term understand very specifically. It wasn't about having a lot. It was about understanding how it worked so I would not find myself repeating the situation that I grew up in. So I think it's no accident that I found my way into the financial business, that money is actually my career. It fascinates me. It always has. It still does. And it really has become my purpose. My purpose in life is very much tied to relieving many young people of the same anxiety I felt about money by providing financial literacy for them.
You know, that anxiety that you talk about, I think about the childhood you have, and I know you've spoken so much about the mother you had. Now, you were the youngest of 6 kids, and the youngest by a mile, right? You came long after the rest of the
20 plus years later.
Right. And your mother, she was anxious about money, but she handled it in a way that actually taught you something, right?
It's interesting because I talk about the fact that the anxiety that was there was unimaginable to me at the time, but it was this unbelievable education that I couldn't appreciate because my mom talked about money all the time. Now, certainly talked about the scarcity issue that we had, but she made sure I understood the price of things.
Yeah.
So when we went to a restaurant, she would have me pay the check from very little, 5 years old, putting the money on the counter, then calculating a tip when I had those skills, then counting change, like all of those things she thought were important. We went to the bank once and she was making a bank deposit and she stopped what she was doing and she said, wait, look at this. Match the number on the bottom of the check with this number on the receipt to make sure the money went into the account correctly. I remember her talking about and showing me the light bill, the phone bill, the water bill. I knew water cost money as a child. She also used to tell me how much our rent was. Now, some of these things weighed on me because I would think to myself, we don't have the money to pay them.
That's a lot of information to hold as a young person.
At the same time, I knew what things cost.
Yeah.
I knew the cost of living.
Right.
And so I wasn't one of these people who was in a vacuum about just what it took to live. Even as a child, I understood that.
Well, I am so interested in exploring the mindset that you developed that allowed you not just to understand money, but to feel like money offered you a path to a certain type of independence and, dare I say, a power that I'd like to believe should be in everyone's birthright.
So first of all, I will tell you the mindset that I developed was one, if I could understand it, then I could master it. But the mastery was about having a better life. Mm-hmm. And so my mindset was not to be imprisoned by this cycle or this fear of scarcity and depravity and financial insecurity. Right. The mindset was one of learning. And if I could learn, I could conquer and do better. And so I started my career at Ariel, and one of the things that I did was I just read everything I could possibly read. And some of it was very fundamental. I tell this to people to this day, just starting with the business section in your local newspaper. A lot of people read the front and the back, the sports pages in the back, the front with the headlines, and they skip the middle. And I just started to get myself immersed in the language of business and the language of money. And sometimes I'd have to look up words. I remember in the early days of reading the Wall Street Journal, it would take me a long time. I would sit and have to read, and I'd be very methodical about it because I didn't know anything. Now, of course, I can read through a journal with as much efficiency or leisure as I want. But these were the kind of things in the very early days. I read a book that I loved so much that was given to me by my Ariel co-CEO, founder John Rogers, and he had me read Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist, about Warren Buffett. It, to this day, is my all-time favorite business book ever.
It's one of the very first books I read when I was learning about
business. So you know
business.
what I'm talking about. Roger Lowenstein wrote that book, and that book is a page turner. People don't believe me when I say that it's a page turner. They're like, a book about this billionaire is a page turner? And I said, I promise you, I read it in a weekend. I couldn't believe just how basic and fundamental he broke things down for you to understand. One of my favorite lines I once heard him give in a speech, he said, when he was talking about investing, he said, everyone thinks I'm looking for a needle in a haystack. He said, I just look for haystacks. And he talked about things like owning Coca-Cola and American Express and companies like that. He said, these are haystacks. They're right in front of you. They're not needles.
So I want to go back to the period in your life, right? So you grew up in Chicago, you went to college at Princeton, you came back and you got your first job out of college at Ariel Investments. This man, John Rogers, hired you. And I have heard you talk about the fact of just how little you understood about finance in that moment. And I heard that with some relief because that, I think, resonates for a lot of our listeners, maybe a lot of the members watching the show right now. The very idea that the S&P 500 was kind of like a head scratcher?
We do not learn about money in school.
Yeah.
That's all the way through some of the greatest universities in this country, all the way at graduate levels. There isn't a conversation about money and investing in a meaningful way. Now, we're getting better as a society. When I first started, there were scant opportunities. And I don't consider home ec investing, how to read a utility bill. But we have now 25 states have some financial curriculum that is required for a high school graduation. It's still not at the level that I think it should be when I've seen some of those curricula around learning about the Dow, the S&P, the NASDAQ, having the tools to be able to select a mutual fund for your 401k plan or understand that. Understanding your financial future is in your hands.
Right.
And right now, if you are not taught, you are winging it, which has tremendous implications for our entire society. So no, if you don't grow up in a home where the stock market is discussed, you are often behind the eight ball. And certainly given the story that I told you, we'd had no extra cash to invest in anything.
Right.
So we certainly weren't talking about the stock market.
And I think that's particularly true if you are a woman or a person of color, right? And you have quoted Judy Collins in that wonderful talk she gave, I think in the early 90s, right? About like this idea that we as women are raised with this sort of savior complex. We can't help it. Look around us. Like all the princesses are still being mostly, I mean, there's Frozen, but mostly they're being rescued by men. Turns out that we have to save ourselves. And in fact, we're capable of it. That's your real message, right?
Well, I have to tell you, I read that quote from Judy Collins when I was 22 years old, starting to work at Ariel. And I joke, I read it in Cosmopolitan magazine. I feel like that line in Working Girl where Meg Ryan says, you never know where you'll learn something. And in that magazine, she said, as women, we are raised to have rescue fantasies. And I'm here to tell you, no one is coming. And when I read that, I was floored. Every sort of idea that I had had been sort of molded into my brain, melted away. And I thought to myself, I'm all I've got. So it behooves me to learn all of these things that ultimately will drive the outcomes that I want for myself if I apply myself. And so it wasn't about being less than open to the opportunities of whatever spouse I would have, et cetera. But it was about that may or may not come to fruition. Right. And I always say to people, sometimes some of those spouses just do a drive-by. They don't stay. And so I do really think it's important for women to have this kind of financial grounding. Interestingly, we as women, we make our biggest financial decisions in times of great emotional stress, typically. Death or divorce. Those are the two times that it really comes to a head.
Because we have to make them.
Correct. And that's not the time to make those decisions.
No.
You don't want to make important financial decisions when you're in great emotional duress.
No.
And so, having prepared and being in front of that, I think is something that is very, very, very important. 77% of adults in this country say they feel financially anxious. 77%. Now think about, that's people who are doing fine financially. That's people who may be struggling. But the idea, again, goes back to the fact we aren't taught about these things, as well as the fact often conversations about money are considered taboo.
Yes.
Many people think it's tacky to talk about money. I feel just the opposite. And so as a result of that, be it a wealthy household or a household that's struggling, I've seen both sides of this where people are trying to protect children or loved ones from this conversation. In the struggling household, they feel that they'll burden them. Maybe in the way that I was talking about my mother, where she had these conversations constantly. In the wealthy households, they think that somehow it will, pollute the child and make them less ambitious, etc. And again, I reject both of those points of view. I think the more we normalize a money conversation, the closer we are going to be to people being comfortable and informed.
Mellody, I think a lot of times when people grow up in similar circumstances, they feel disempowered by money. Money belongs to someone else. It's somebody else's job. I'm not even going to think about it. What do you think happened for you that led you to a place where you thought, I'm going to empower myself to figure this out?
Well, one, I think it was just necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. I needed to understand in order to, quite honestly, be able to live in my own head. I needed to sort that out so that I didn't feel that tremendous stress that I felt as a child. I read something the other day that said our prisons are thoughts. And so if you can get your thoughts clarified, you can have that prison fall away.
Right.
And I didn't want to live in that prison my whole life. I think that was something that was very, very important. The other thing that I think that I was very clear about the fact that to the extent that I could understand this, maybe I could also help other people. That gave me a lot of purpose.
Right.
I felt a calling around that work. Money makes people's lives better. And every day we are actually on a journey that is very virtuous, which is to help people have the lives that they want in their pension and their retirement, to send their kids to college, whatever it might be, to start a business. The other thing that happened during that period is I think I was able to put money in a context that really, really, I never thought about this before until right now. I was able to put money into a context where I wasn't consumed with it
Yeah.
in a way of attainment. I was consumed with it in a way of knowledge. And so the thing that I say to people, to put this in context for you, I feel very strongly that money should not be glorified or vilified. I think a lot of people glorify money in ways that I think is not healthy.
Yes.
And I think they vilify money as well for someone who's done well or, have accomplished things. They are not bad people, or someone who has not done well.
Yeah.
That doesn't make them lazy or bad. And I think that polarization that occurs in our society was something that I saw through very quickly. So I wasn't in a worshiping mode of glorification, and I wasn't in a mode of, my family was less than because we did less well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, when I hear you say that, I think about all of the values that we wrongfully ascribe to rich people or to poor people, right? Based solely on the fact that they have access or they don't have access to capital. The path that you lay out is a path that maybe puts some power in people's hands to feel like wherever they are on that spectrum, they can move toward having more access to capital, not with all of the baggage that we connect to it.
And interestingly, I want to tie this back to the book, and I'm not doing it as a plug. I'm doing it as a way of actually really making the point.
We did have you in here to talk about the book, Mellody.
That's why I wanted to start with the language of money for a child. It's a language.
Yeah.
Just like you learn a foreign language, it's easier to learn a foreign language the younger you are. My daughter speaks fluent Mandarin, but we started when she was born. So for her, it's just normal and not hard. When you talk about the language of money, I'm trying to interject and expose young people to the language of money at the earliest ages and do it with trivia and fun facts. I mean, I became so obsessed with this. I wrote a 70-page children's book, 10,000 words about money, but it's with the most hilarious at times facts, the most novel. I want people to read it and say, who knew? And then that adult who's reading it to a child is learning that language of money, but that child is learning the language of money.
Right. I want to bring this back to something you teased, this idea of starting to think about financial education for the next sort of age bracket up, for teenagers in particular, because we give them so little, and because even what we give them is often laced with so much emotion. I mean, is it your sense that we should be teaching this in schools?
Absolutely. My goal is that every school will have a financial literacy curriculum that is robust. Again, it amazes me that in high school in America today, you can take wood shop or home ec and not a class on investing. That investing class has profound implications for the rest of a person's life. People are always shocked by one of my recommendations for teens, but one of the things I think you should do with teens is you should give them a credit card at a very young age.
Oh my gosh.
I know, they're like weapon of mass destruction, but it's a weapon of mass destruction when that teen leaves your house and you can't control their spending or their responsibility. And most people, when their teen does leave their house to go to college or start their first job, whatever it might be, go to trade school, the parent has to sign for that credit. And so your own credit is put at risk if that teen or that young person is irresponsible. So I am all for training wheels before D-Day comes and that child leaves the house.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I'm saying start early, 14, 15 years old, to teach them budgeting, to teach them the appropriate spending, to help them understand you pay off the whole balance. You don't pay the minimum.
Right.
All of those things, to really start that conversation early so that the child is not winging it when it really matters.
Right. I think here about my first credit card that I got my first year of college and the pair of jeans I bought on it that I paid for the next 7 years.
And I think about I had an Amex that I went on a ski trip and then I could not pay the bill. And I was panicked and terrified. What I mean panicked, I felt like I was I was going to have
Right.
not only the people come to take me away, but I was like, I couldn't believe I did something which was repeating my past of my childhood. And so that's why I say I got so sort of right with myself about it. And it's the craziest end to this story, which was this bill was $2,000.
Right.
I was in a state of panic. I was a student at Princeton freshman year. And true story, my aunt died. And my aunt left me $2,500. I swear on my eyes.
I mean, the
and that is
universe
how
was
I
bringing it
paid.
full circle.
I mean, I was so sad that she died, but that's how
Right.
I paid the Amex bill. And after that, I was like, never, ever, ever again.
Okay, so I want to bring in one more question from our listeners as we round out our conversation, our time together. Suzanne from Dallas asks this, but it's indicative of a question that we're getting a lot. They want to know more about your own journey in your career and how you came to a lot of these thoughts. Suzanne asks, what were your top priorities when you became co-CEO in particular? And how have those priorities either cemented or shifted?
It's so interesting you asked this question because I've thought a lot about it. The priorities evolve. What I was when I was 22 was different than 30, different than 40, and is different than 55. I read an interview with someone who was a very famous portfolio manager, and he said when he interviews people for jobs, he said, do you seek money, power, or fame? And he believes that people seek one of those things. And I was really struck by it. And so, like, as you sit there and do some soul searching about yourself, you say, how would I answer this question?
Yeah.
How would I answer this question if I had to choose one of them? Well, when I was 22 years old, I was seeking money. I needed enough money to feel secure. It wasn't about, millions. It was about enough.
Yeah.
And enough wasn't that much back then because I had lived on very little. When I got my first job at Ariel, I made $35,000 a year, which to me was like $1 million. That was in 1991.
Wow.
I was so happy. I can't even tell you. And it wasn't a lot of money then. It really wasn't. It wasn't one of these numbers that if you look back on that, no, I had a reasonable existence as a 22-year-old, living in a studio apartment. And, it was, but to me, it was great.
And just
It
for
was
reference sake, in the 90s, my first job as a public school teacher in New York was $29,000. So that's, that's what you're talking about.
It wasn't that much,
No.
right? Different.
You could do it. But
Yeah, I was in Chicago, so probably a lower cost of living. So
Sure.
maybe it went a little bit further. But you get the idea. So money during those years was something that was very important. And it's interesting, as I evolved, especially when I got to be co-CEO starting in 2019, I was president of Ariel for more than 20 years. I would say by the time I got to co-CEO, and I'm going to say this, which I think is, it takes some bravery to say it, but I thought about power.
Yeah.
And I thought about power in a very specific way, power that I could use to help people and power that I could use to affect change. And that was something, it wasn't about money. It was about what kind of influence do I have and how can that influence make a difference? So how can all of this version of Mellody that it rolls up into this moment of age 55 put financial literacy in the hands of a child?
Yeah.
That to me is a very powerful thing to do. And so my goals and my plans evolved.
Right.
And right now, I have what I want and need. I really do. Now, I'm not satisfied in terms of what I want to accomplish, but I do feel grounded in a feeling of stability. And yet, I feel very purposeful and still some anxiety about making sure I fulfill my potential.
Mellody, it's such a great segue to what I really wanted to be the final question of this time together, and I hope it's just our first time. I was curious, we talk so much about mindset and how it's set so early around money, and our emotional stories around money become our truths as adults. You have traveled so far from your childhood economically. Do you still carry with you the same set of feelings about money as you had when you were 10?
Yes. So I don't even think I can answer this question without welling up. So I thought about it a lot during COVID. And during COVID, my family was locked in and locked down. My daughter was 7 years old. And all I kept thinking about, if I were 7 and this happened to my family, we'd probably be living in a car. And I couldn't shake it. So I had dreams about it. I was really, really affected. That also gave me a sense of guilt. Like, well, you have this security that other people don't have. But feeling guilt is not enough. So then I felt the need to do things about it, to try to help other people during that time, and to not take this life for granted, to feel such gratitude for it every single day. And the knowing that I had food and shelter and all of those things. And so I think when you go through a trauma, whatever your childhood trauma is, and we all have our versions of it, no matter who we are, it stays with you. And that trauma is something that you work through for a lot of your life. And mine still rears its ugly head when it comes to this idea of financial security. And it could be, what is your recurring nightmare dream?
Yeah.
Mine is that I have nowhere to live.
Yeah.
To this day.
Yeah.
When I get really shaky, that's the dream that I have, that I'm going door to door.
Yeah.
Trying to have someone take me in. That is irrational. It will not happen, but it is still there. Now, the good thing about that gives me the energy and the grounding to understand what that feels like for other people and make sure I have that empathy and effort to help them.
Yeah.
But it also keeps me grounded in terms of the gratitude and appreciation that I literally wake up in the morning, literally look at the ceiling where I live, and I'm like, I'm so happy I live here every day.
That was Mellody Hobson, author of Priceless Facts About Money. You can find it wherever you buy your books. Now, there's so much that I'm going to take away from this conversation and bring right back to my living room to review again with Jude. You really never can review it too many times. First of all, we all inherit our core beliefs about money, and we pass them along to the people that we are raising. It's really critical that we make these beliefs explicit for ourselves and then, therefore, for the people that we care about. The more that we make them explicit, the more that we can figure out where we are being ruled by things that we don't want to be ruled by. And that brings me to number 2. You don't need to operate according to a scarcity mindset when it comes to money. You don't need to operate out of a place of anxiety and fear. You can learn what you need to understand in order to take control of your money if you apply yourself. Finally, and this is the takeaway that is really going to stay with me, no hero is coming to save any of us. That's not how it works. But we can be our own heroes. We've got this. We can apply ourselves and pay attention. We can disrupt the narratives that we may have grown up around and inside of around money. We can shape new narratives based on the idea that we are confident and in control and smart enough to understand the mechanics of our finances. It's an opportunity available to anyone. Now, we are going to talk about this and so much more on Office Hours this week. I hope you'll join us. It really is my favorite half hour of the week. I get together with our senior producer, Sarah Storm, and all of y'all for an open chat. We check in, we check on each other, we talk about the episode. If you haven't been, consider this your invitation. And by the way, if you loved this episode, I hope you will share it with a friend. It really helps new listeners find our show. Thanks for joining me this week in the studio. I'll be right back here next Monday with more from Hello Monday.